Erin, it's so great to talk to you. I can't wait to dive into more about you, your personal story, and your podcast today. So I appreciate you joining me.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for just welcoming me and letting me be a part of your community.
Absolutely. So we weren't sure exactly what we wanted to focus on today. There's always so much to be talked about. We're both talkers having podcasts, but I was like, why don't we talk a little bit more about you, going into more depth about your story and your podcast. You have a podcast called God Hears Her, and you have some co-hosts there. Why don't you tell me a little bit more about how your podcast originated, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah. So first off, I never thought in a million years that I would be in the space of podcast world of anything. I own a company called So Worth Loving. It's a lifestyle clothing company. And in that process of just being on the other side of that, I witnessed people struggling with self-worth like me and you and all of us. And in that journey, that kind of put me in the space of writing, put me in the space of speaking. And after going through a really messy divorce in the process of owning that company, I didn't really know. I just struggled with my worth. I didn't know really the trajectory of purpose, career. When you experience an implosion in your life, you really don't know what's up or down. You don't know left from right. You don't know anything. And so this podcast found me at the end of an implosion and the beginning of rebuild of my life. And I remember getting the phone call from Our Daily Bread Ministries. And if you're not familiar with Our Daily Bread, they've been around for forever. They're those little devotionals that are like, you probably see your grandparents or your mom have them on their nightstand. Yeah. And they what's so cool is that they translate these devotions in over 150 languages. So they're already like thinking through this lens of faith worldwide, not just Western Christianity, which I really appreciate about ODB. But I get a phone call. They catch me from, I guess, the internet webs, or you know how that is, something like that. And they asked me if I would be interested in brainstorming about a concept for a podcast. At the time, it was for something completely different department of the ministry. And so then as I have this conversation, I'm like, is my voice even qualified to be a host of a podcast? When you're rebuilding your life, you second guess everything around you. And so I wasn't sure. And so they asked me, they're like, would you be interested in putting together a podcast in your city? You can brand it however you want and send it to us and we'll check it out. And so I did. And it was not God Hears Her. It was a random one that I created. Yeah. So it was like, they didn't even have God Hears Her then. This was in 2019. I do that. And then from there, they're like, hey, we have an idea for a women's podcast. We're not sure what it's going to be called, but we have a book that's sold 500,000 copies. Clearly women want to know that God hears them. Would you be interested in having that conversation? And I thought, oh my gosh, I don't know if I'm qualified for any of this. Sure. And I was excited and I was nervous. And so Elisa is one of my co-hosts. We now have a third one, Vivian Mabuni. But when we first started, Elisa, I didn't really know much about Elisa. And they wanted to do kind of like a blind date audition. They flew me out to Grand Rapids. I'm from Atlanta. And Grand Rapids is where their headquarters are. And so they flew me out there. And I met Elisa. I was so nervous because her resume looked really great. And I'm like, oh, I don't know. I don't know. I'm a mess. I'm rebuilding. and it was so beautiful. And we hit it off and it was really special. And then from there, we've now are 200 episodes in. And it's been a journey. We interview people, specifically women, produced by women, and interview them on the messy parts of life and the in-between.
I love hearing an origin story of how someone got into something that they feel so passionate about. And again, it sounds like you had a bit of imposter syndrome there. Am I supposed to be doing this? This feels weird. Even putting my voice out there feels weird. I feel like within the last year or so, I finally become comfortable with saying, yeah, I have a podcast, because it doesn't seem as weird as it did back in 2015. I'm like, yes, it seems so embarrassing and so weird. And it's still kind of embarrassing because obviously we are confident enough to say, these are conversations that are worth having, and I'm the one to bring it to you. So there's a
Mm,
bit of
yeah.
I always say like an overinflated sense of self. I'm not putting that on you, but I'm
Yeah.
saying like we are the connector for these conversations to be had.
Yeah. That's true. Yeah. We're the bridge between what people don't talk about and hoping to have a good conversation about it for
Mhm.
sure. And I do think that there is an imposter syndrome and a fear of being perceived as arrogant. You know, growing up, I had had some words spoken over me that either I was self-righteous, I was too much, I was too bright. And so I think some of those words spoken over me as a little girl coming into a performance space, you're like, well, I don't want to be too much, but I do enjoy doing this. I do enjoy being a connector of stories. So how do I walk that dance of not wanting to be arrogant, but being confident?
Yeah. And you also, like you said, you have this brand called So Worth Loving. How did the brand originate? And I guess, how did you gain a healthy self worth? Because again, I think in our culture, there is such an emphasis on the self, like an over emphasis.
Mm-hmm.
And yet we can't disconnect that we should love ourselves and we should be confident in ourselves. And we were created as the only one. So I'll let you speak.
Yeah, yeah. I when I started So Worth Loving, this was like 14 years ago. Uh, Shout out to Tumblr back in the day. I was like a Tumblr chick, if anybody. I had a Tumblr blog and I had a tiny music career.
Uh-huh.
And I offered to spray paint people's shirts for free on my Tumblr
Oh,
blog. It was like my music blog. And I just said, mail me your personal shirt and I'll spray paint your So Worth Loving and I'll mail it back to you for free. But little did I know that there are so many people that struggle with self-worth. And then it wasn't really ever talked about. It was one of those things where publicly through social media, no one was really sharing and being open with their struggles. It was kind of taboo or just unspoken. And so people would mail me their personal shirt. I thought maybe 5 people would do it. And then there's like hundreds mailing me their shirt and wanting me to spray paint with cardboard stencils. And actually there it is. Those are like the first two. And so anyways, it turned into, I should probably screen print a few to like, my career story is me always tiptoeing into something and nervous about doing it. But I decided to screen print shirts. And then as I did that, I realized, wow, this shirt is not a t-shirt. It is a bridge between not talking about our struggles of self-worth and talking about it, believing we're not worthy of love and learning how to love ourselves. And what that looks like is being patient and kind to ourselves. It's not from an arrogant standpoint, but it's from a nurturing standpoint. And I do believe that the moment we can start to really believe our value and our worth, the careers that we have are different, the relationships that we have are different, the way we have boundaries are different, the things we say yes to and no to look different. And by that, we can then serve communities better in that journey of knowing our worth. And so I can say that now because I've been on the other side of so many thousands of stories of people being brave and honest. And, you know, you asked the question, how does that play a part in my own personal journey of worth? I just believed in all the wrong things as to what I thought where I found my worth. And that was in my performance or being perfect or doing all the right Christian girl things, quote unquote, air quotes if you're listening. Uh, and when all of those things didn't work out and my life still looked messy, I thought, okay, I need to come back to the table on how do I treat myself with respect and dignity.
we don't have to go there, but you mentioned you went through a divorce. Did you wrestle with this during that time? Because
Oh,
obviously in
yeah.
Christian communities, no one likes to talk about divorce.
No, you have a scarlet letter on not even on your shirts, like on your back and forehead. Unfortunately. Yeah, so I went through, and I don't mind going there. I'm very open to
Okay.
however deep you want to go into this topic.
I would love to hear from a Christian that's been divorced because I don't think I've ever talked to a Christian that's been divorced on the
Yeah.
show. And yet I know many Christians that have been divorced. But again, it still seems like there's this taboo. I know counselors that don't even ever want to mention the word. So yeah, let's go there.
You know, and yes, I love it. I love that you want to do that. What's so unfortunate is that it's a very common experience that our friends and community are having and unfortunately going through. And yet we still are scared to talk about it because we're scared we may catch the divorce bug. Or if we discuss it, that means we validate that you should get divorced. And so we just don't even walk towards it at all. While there's women and men struggling in abusive relationships that are desperate for somebody to listen, and whether it's a church to support them in or a community to walk with them through. It's so messy, and divorce is like a death, but the person still lives on because it's a death of what you thought you had. It's a death of what you thought your future would be. It's a death of the present self. It's a death, and it's a huge grief. And so for me, the point up to my divorce, I had believed the lie that if I do all these things, if I perform right, then I will have a happy, healthy marriage. And what it looked like, there were things within my marriage that were extremely unhealthy. One, some of even the way that I pursued attention and affection met with addiction, somebody having an addiction on the other side in the relationship, a hidden one. And so going through all of that, enabling, for me, I was enabling, I was getting my worth from different areas instead of the true place of where I can find my worth, which is in God. It is not in my performance. It's not in my relationship. It's not in the way my family looks. It's not in the performance of checking the boxes off of doing the right things. So after my divorce, I kind of said and defied God because I felt so hurt by the Christian community that I was like, man, if there's no love when you go through a thing that you feel so loveless in, and Christians can't be loving towards, I don't want anything to do with this. And so I defied God. I said, see you later, everybody. And I went to go, quote unquote, live my life and my truth that we hear people say often. And my quote unquote, my truth was really a bunch of lies. It was a bunch of lies that I had believed since I was 7 years old and I had never faced. And the way that came to the surface was me throwing myself into the dating scene and having certain behaviors and patterns that weren't, they were instant gratifying to a void I had inside. Then I realized that way of living is not also fulfilling. So what is the truth and what is worth? And
Yeah.
I remember going through a terrible breakup after my divorce. Brene Brown talks about, she says, work through your mess, don't work on your mess on people. And I worked on my mess on people. And so it looked like that coming out of that relationship. Excuse me. And I just remember going to God and being like, I'm angry at you and I'm angry at your people. And if they think this way about me, you must think this way about me. And so I don't know how to know what truth is anymore. And it came with like questions and crying and anger towards God. And I hadn't talked to him in a couple years. And I just remember him coming to me with a question. Now, if you are listening to this and you're like, that's weird that you heard from God, or if that's kind of an odd thing to hear. It wasn't like an audible, but I knew it wasn't a voice in me, and I knew it wasn't a dark voice. So the only thing I can say was like, there was a pressing of a curiosity of a voice that was kind. And he said to me, are you exhausted? And I'm like, I am so tired. I'm burnt out on religion. I'm burned out on my life. At that time, I had acquired so much money, like $100,000 plus from debt from my marriage. And so I was running and working, and I'm like, yeah, I am exhausted. And I remember the next day finding the scripture, Matthew 11:28, and I had not opened my Bible in a while, and it talks about, are you tired, burnt out on religion? Come away with me, get away with me, and you'll recover your life. I was like, I want all that. I want all that. So whatever that is, I want it. And that was the beginning, really, of the repair of my relationship with the faith community and my repair with my relationship with God and my relationship with myself. I wanted to learn how to love who I was alone, because I had been in a marriage for 10 years and with my former for 14, and I had not ever known how to to love myself by myself and have that relationship with God too. And it was a beautiful journey, and it was a really, really hard one. And it still is, because I mean, I'm remarried and I'm blended family now. And God's done a lot of healing and redemption. But the redemption, I think, is always continuing. And I think Christians desire with redemption, I think they desire like, now it's finally, you're good and you're done. And it's just not, that's not the case in our lives.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing all of that. I appreciate it because, like I said, I think that it is a taboo subject, and yet there's nothing that God can't redeem in this life. And everything that you've mentioned, with the exception of divorce, like I've done all of the things, I've done all the sins. And so to me, I open you with arms if you're broken, because I've been there and I still am. But again, it's a journey of feeling validated that you are worthy, believing that God feels that way. Because I do think we can allow people to twist scripture, but also we just inflate their view of us over God's. And I don't know, I guess I've never been,
that's a good way to say it.
Yeah, I guess I've just never, like with any sin habit I've ever come into, or I guess I should say anything that bad, I put in quotes, that I have had happen, I'm like, oh, that was my choice that led me into this. So that has nothing to do with God. God gave me the freedom to behave, and I chose poorly. But again, I've never experienced loss in the sense of death of anyone that I love, or the loss of a marriage, or the loss of a child, like a miscarriage or something. So maybe I can't fully speak to that. But yeah, I think this idea of worthiness in Christian circles is definitely something just to unpack in general, because again, you have this culture that's telling you you're worthy exactly how you are, and I think that's a little bit far to the one side. And then there's this side that's you're unworthy if you do the smallest sin. So yeah,
it's true. It's conditional, which is the opposite of how Jesus lived his life. It's, you have the people that want you to perform, and then you have Jesus sitting with people not wanting them to perform, but just to be honest with the things they struggle with. Be honest with him in it. And by being honest with him, you're owning. And that's what you're saying. It's like there's ownership. You have to have ownership for healing. I had to have ownership to go, okay, I can't blame my ex-husband and my community and the church. And I can for a season and be angry about it. And then I can do the work and go, there's a part that I play, and there's compassion that I have towards, the reason people responded the way that they did is because they've never been in proximity to somebody that's this broken. And there's compassion for that, because they don't have the tools in the toolbox to walk with somebody in that. And I can't expect them to, their response cannot be a remedy for my pain. They're not responsible for that, So there's ownership. That's the beauty, I think, of healing. And I think that's what you're saying, though. It's like, you can say, this is my choice. This was my choice in doing this.
I think let's talk about, I will say, part of me is like, I'm grateful for some of the things that I've been through, in the sense, if we talk about redemption, I'm like, I'm grateful for some of this, because I feel like, obviously age appropriately, but I've been able to share with my daughters just about relationships in general. We've talked a little bit about divorce because she knows families that have been affected by it. And I want her to know, I don't know if you felt this way, but me growing up in the 90s, I was like, no one talked about how hard marriage is. Everyone's like, it's the best thing. It's so amazing. And maybe that's for the few of you listening. Maybe that's true, but it's also so much work. And I think that I just had this unrealistic expectation that if you marry a Christian, it's going to be perfection. Again, I've seen that time and time again with friendships. This is a lot of work, but it is, if you're in a healthy relationship, it's that iron sharpening iron, which is good for us.
Yeah.
There's purpose in that. But I feel like I can talk to my daughter about some of these things that maybe no one ever talked to me about. And so I am grateful in that sense, that I'm like, whatever, I endured that stuff. I made some poor choices, but onward, I'm not going to be perfect until the day of Christ Jesus. But it just, I don't know where I'm going with any of that.
Well, no, I love that you're having those honest conversations with your daughter, because she's seeing that with her friend groups,
Yeah.
Like, we're a blended family. We have 9, 15, and 17-year-old girls. And
okay,
So having these conversations, not only like our personal stories that we bring in, there's technically 4 adults right now in these girls' lives that have different stories about divorce and a different version of the story. And also, they're watching their friends and they're watching their friends' parents go through a lot of fighting and a lot of conflict, and they hear things about what their dad is doing or their mom is doing and all of these things. And I'm so proud and grateful that we have these honest conversations with our daughters, because I think vulnerability fosters more vulnerability. And so they're going to be open to what they're hearing at school instead of shame it or hide it away. And they're learning how to have these conversations with their friends, like that's what's so cool, is that our stories as adults with these girls, we can influence them in ways that they can influence their friends at school. Mm-hmm. So I just think it's awesome. I think it's awesome that you're having these honest conversations with your daughter, because I think that kids more than ever are being exposed to things at school earlier than we want them to.
Yeah. To me, I'm like, I don't know what the motivations were there. Obviously, my parents weren't poorly motivated. I think they just were afraid of introducing some of these topics too young, because then it's like, is this going to make people too curious, and then they're going to dive deeper into it? And I just think their parents didn't give them the tools to have these conversations. Again, I'm making general statements with everything I'm saying.
Sure.
But I'm supposed to be raising all of 3 of my kids as to be self-sufficient adults one day to go out into the world. So I just feel like being direct is the best, again, age appropriately, is the best way to go about it. And you, on your podcast, you've had a lot of conversations about equipping the next generation, not just in their spirituality, but just in leadership and all the roles. And so I just feel, why not have the conversation? What am I afraid of? It usually comes back to something that I'm insecure about, or don't feel like I have the words to say.
Yes, it's so true. Mm-hmm. I always say that honest people that are honest with their story have no problem with your honesty with yours. And I think that's so it. Good. It's like, you got to be so honest with your own story, because if you are, then it's nothing really offends you at that point, because I've offended myself with my own self. I've been honest about it.
I hear you. Okay. So I don't think we touched on it, but I want to go back to, as we kind of wrap up here, your podcast I mentioned at the beginning. It's called God Hears Her. And you also have a devotional by the same name. Tell me the meaning behind that.
Well, we did a poll on 4 different names, and we did a poll with, I think it was like 600 women. I could be wrong about that. I might be more than that. But anyways, we did a poll and within our community, and we found that God Hears Her was the name that everybody wanted the most. And that was because we struggle with believing that God hears us, that he sees us, that he loves us, that he knows who we are, that he knows our voice. And that's been the common thread with all of the conversations that we've had on God Hears Her, is that it's not that we don't interview women that just have always known that God's listening. It's that they've wrestled with the silence and the waiting. And most times our life is filled with the waiting and the silence. And so we wanted the podcast to be not only represented from the devotional that had influence, but then also reflect the struggle and the wrestling in the silence and the waiting, but reminding women that God hears them.
Okay. Very cool. Very cool. Well, I'm glad that we got to just know you better. Like I said, with this show, as I was brainstorming, switching from minimalist moms to clear intentions, I was like, okay, what's the purpose? What is my mission here? And it took me about 1.5 years to figure it out. And I still, who really knows? But I was like, I want people that are experts in something, or their stories can teach listeners something that they can take away into their own life. So there's some kind of takeaway from every person that I talk to. So I appreciate you, again, being vulnerable with your story, encouraging women to know that regardless of how broken they feel, that there's redemption there. I really appreciate you sharing all of that.
Oh, thank you for inviting me and letting me be a part of your community.
So that said, where can listeners connect more with you and hear more on your podcast?
Yeah. So you can follow us at God Hears Her on Instagram. We have godhearsher.org, where we also have a blog. in a community of women that write often. And then you can find me, Erin Eddy, ERYNEDDY on Instagram too.
Perfect. Well, as we wrap up, I'm going to ask you the final question that I ask all my guests. And it is, what does it mean to you to live a life with clear intentions?
It looks like me becoming more disciplined in the areas that I struggle with. So being more disciplined.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's a never ending journey until death.
Until death. That's true.
I try to remind, that's like my stoic philosophy.
Love it. Love it. That's awesome.
Yeah. I'm like, well, I guess just onward.
Yep. Till death, till the other side of heaven.
Well, Erin, thanks so much for joining me today. This was so great.
Thank you so much for having me.